Harper believed apartment 4B was her ultimate sanctuary, a silent fortress where she could finally vanish from her abusive ex's reach. She never suspected that the man living in 4A, with his sharp, guarded eyes and cold, calculated silence, was actually the most dangerous Mafia boss on the East Coast. The deadbolt slid into place with a heavy, satisfying metallic thud. Harper pressed her forehead against the cool steel of the door, her lungs expanding as she took what felt like her first real breath in 3 years. Apartment 4B in Boston's Seaport District wasn't just a home, it was a fortress. The rent was astronomical, draining the savings she had meticulously hidden in a secret Bank of America account over the last 18 months. But it had fob-secured elevators, a 24-hour concierge named Louise, who treated the lobby like Fort Knox, and no paper trail linking back to her old life in Manhattan. More importantly, it was entirely out of Brandon's reach. Brandon. Even thinking his name made the faint, crescent-shaped scar on her collarbone pulse. A prominent corporate litigator with friends in the NYPD, Brandon had made her life a gilded cage. When the emotional abuse had finally escalated into physical violence, Harper had packed a single Samsonite duffel bag, abandoned her leased Audi A4 in a Long Island strip mall, and vanished. Now she was just Harper Collins, a common enough name to blend into the background, working as an ER trauma nurse at Massachusetts General Hospital. For the first 3 weeks, the silence of the luxury loft was deafening. Harper spent her days off sitting on her West Elm sofa, drinking black coffee from a chipped mug, waiting for the other shoe to drop. She checked the peephole every time the elevator chimed. She kept her phone on airplane mode. It was during one of these paranoid peephole sessions that she first saw him. The man in 4A. He stepped off the elevator on a rainy Tuesday evening. Harper watched through the distorted fisheye lens as he paused in the hallway. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with a terrifying, absolute stillness. He wasn't conventionally handsome. His features were too sharp, too harsh. A jagged, faded white scar cut through his left eyebrow. But the suit he wore was unmistakable. A bespoke Tom Ford, charcoal grey, tailored to absolute perfection. A platinum Rolex Daytona gleamed under the hallway sconces as he reached for his keys. As if sensing her gaze, the man froze. He didn't look at the peephole. He just stopped, his posture shifting ever so slightly, the muscles in his jaw ticking. Harper clamped a hand over her mouth, terrified to even breathe. After a grueling 5 seconds, he unlocked his door and disappeared inside. Just a neighbor, Harper whispered to herself, stepping back. Just a wealthy, intimidating Boston neighbor. But over the next month, the red flags began to mount. The man, whose name on the buzzer simply read D. Russo, kept impossible hours. Harper, working grueling night shifts at MGH, often crossed paths with him at 3 or 4 in the morning. He always smelled faintly of expensive cedar cologne, black coffee, and on one memorable occasion, gunpowder and copper. He never had groceries delivered. He never brought women home. And the heavy armored black Mercedes G-Wagon idling in the loading dock downstairs always seemed to be waiting specifically for him, flanked by men whose tailored coats did a poor job of hiding the bulk of shoulder holsters. Despite her survival instincts screaming at her to keep her distance, Harper found herself inexplicably fascinated by Dominic Russo. There was a quiet gravity to him. He never looked at her with the predatory, calculating gaze Brandon used. If anything, Dominic seemed to actively look through her, treating her with a polite, cold indifference that should have been insulting, but to a woman in hiding, felt like safety, until the night her two worlds violently collided. Harper was walking home from the Broadway T station. The November air was biting, whipping through her thin wool coat. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She froze. Very few people had this new number. She pulled out the iPhone, the screen glowing brightly in the dark alleyway. Unknown. Number. Did you really think you could run, Harper? I know you're in Boston. Her blood turned to ice. Brandon. He had found the city. It was only a matter of time before his private investigators tracked down the seaport address. Panic blinding her, she broke into a sprint, clutching her pepper spray. She didn't stop running until she burst through the lobby doors of her building, startling Luis at the desk. She mumbled an apology, practically diving into the elevator and swiping her fob with trembling hands. When the doors opened on the 4th floor, she stepped out, her mind racing with contingency plans. She needed a new burner phone. She needed to empty her checking account. She needed to run again. But as she turned the corner toward her door, her foot slipped on something wet. Harper looked down. The hallway runner, a plush, cream-colored wool, was stained with a thick, glistening trail of crimson. The blood led directly to the door of 4A. Harper's medical training kicked in before her common sense could stop her. The trail of blood was heavy, indicative of an arterial compromise or a deep puncture wound. She followed the crimson droplets. Dominic's door was slightly ajar. The heavy wood splintered near the lock as if someone had kicked it open, though the apartment inside was dead silent. "Run to your apartment. Lock the door. Call the police." The rational voice in her head sounded exactly like her old self. But if she called the Boston Police Department, it would generate a report. Her name would be in the system. Brandon's contacts would ping it in hours. She couldn't risk the cops. Taking a shaky breath, Harper pushed the door to 4A open. "Mr. Russo," she whispered. The apartment was sprawling, a minimalist masterpiece of dark leather, steel and floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the Boston harbor. And on the $10,000 pristine white rug in the center of the living room, Dominic Russo was bleeding out. He was slumped against a glass coffee table, his Tom Ford jacket discarded on the floor. His white dress shirt was soaked in a horrifying amount of red. In his right hand, resting casually on his knee, was a matte black Glock 90. As Harper stepped forward, the gun snapped up, the barrel pointed directly between her eyes. His movements were lightning fast, despite the catastrophic blood loss. "Give me one reason not to pull this trigger," Dominic rasped, his dark eyes clouded with pain, but lethal all the same. Harper raised her hands slowly, showing her empty palms. "Because you're going into hypovolemic shock," she said, keeping her voice incredibly steady, a skill she had honed in the ER trauma bays. "Your skin is pale, you're shivering, and judging by the amount of blood on the rug, if you pull that trigger, the recoil will probably make you pass out. I'm a trauma nurse. Let me help you." Dominic stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic drumming of rain against the glass panes. Finally, his arm dropped. The gun hit the floor with a heavy thud. "Lock the door," he ordered, his voice tight. "And don't you dare call an ambulance." Harper moved fast. She deadbolted the front door, sprinted to her own apartment to grab her trauma kit, a fully stocked medical bag she kept for emergencies, and rushed back. Dominic had stripped off his ruined shirt. Harper knelt beside him, her professional detachment masking the sheer terror thrumming through her veins. He had a deep, jagged laceration on his left side, just below the ribs. It wasn't a bullet wound. It looked like a knife slash, violently delivered. "This is going to hurt," she warned, snapping on blue nitrile gloves and uncapping a bottle of betadine. "I've had worse," he grunted, leaning his head back against the sofa. As she worked, cleaning the wound, packing it, and prepping a needle for sutures, Harper couldn't help but notice the geography of scars mapping his torso. Old bullet wounds, burn marks, surgical scars. This man wasn't just a tough guy. He lived in a war zone. "Who did this?" she asked softly, threading the curved needle. "A disagreement over shipping lanes out of the port of Providence," Dominic replied casually, as if discussing the weather. He didn't flinch as the needle pierced his skin. "They didn't agree with my tariff." "You're not a hedge fund manager, are you?" Harper muttered, tying off a stitch. A low, dark chuckle rumbled in Dominic's chest. "No, Harper, I'm not." She froze. "How do you know my name?" Dominic opened his eyes, pinning her with a gaze that was terrifyingly perceptive. "I own this building. I own the company that manages it. When a woman pays 6 months' rent in advance using cash and a cashier's check and puts 3 deadbolts on her door, I make it my business to know who she is." Harper's heart dropped into her stomach. "You looked into me." "I did," Dominic said. He watched her hands as she bandaged him. "I know your real name isn't Harper Collins. I know you used to live in Tribeca. And I know you're running from a man named Brandon." Harper backed away, dropping the bloody gauze onto the floor. The sanctuary she had built for herself shattered into a million pieces. "You're going to use it against me. You're going to tell him." Dominic shifted, wincing slightly as the painkillers she had given him began to kick in. He reached out, his large, calloused hand wrapping around her wrist. His grip wasn't painful, but it was an anchor, completely immovable. "Listen to me carefully," Dominic said, his voice dropping an octave, losing any trace of its previous casualness. "In my world, loyalty is currency. You just saved my life. That means you are under my protection." "I don't want your protection," Harper shot back, her voice shaking. "I just want to be left alone." "It's too late for that," Dominic said flatly. He nodded toward her coat pocket. "I saw you sprinting from the T-station. I saw you checking your phone like it was a live grenade. He found you, didn't he?" Harper swallowed hard, tears of pure frustration stinging her eyes. She slowly nodded. "I got a text tonight. He knows I'm in Boston." Dominic's expression darkened. The cold, calculated Mafia boss faded, replaced by something much more dangerous. A predator looking at a threat to his territory. "Let him come," Dominic said softly. "The men I deal with are monsters, Harper. Brandon is just a bully in a suit. If he steps foot in this building, he won't walk out of it." For the first time in years, looking into the eyes of a ruthless criminal, Harper didn't feel fear. She felt a twisted, terrifying sense of security. She had moved into the apartment to hide from the devil she knew. She hadn't realized she was moving in with a devil who was willing to fight for her. But the text on her phone was just the beginning. 300 miles away in New York, Brandon had already hired a team. And they weren't just coming to serve legal papers. They were coming to drag her back, kicking and screaming. The war was coming to the 4th floor of the Harbor View lofts, and Harper had just inadvertently picked a side. The 48 hours following Dominic Russo's stabbing were a masterclass in organized chaos. Harper's quiet, sterile world was entirely upended. The illusion of safety she had painstakingly constructed in apartment 4B was replaced by the terrifying, undeniable reality of apartment 4A. She had not returned to her own unit. Under Dominic's strict, uncompromising orders, her belongings had been swiftly moved into his sprawling penthouse suite by two of his silent, heavily armed associates, Leo and Matteo. Harper had protested, naturally. She had paced the length of Dominic's Brazilian walnut floors, arguing that staying with him would only put a larger target on her back. She insisted that Brandon, her abusive, relentless ex-fiancé, was a corporate litigator with deep pockets and dangerous connections at Vanguard Security, a private military contractor known for operating outside the boundaries of the law. Dominic had simply watched her pace from his position on the leather sofa, nursing a glass of Macallan 18-year-old Scotch. Despite the heavy sutures pulling at his left side, he looked completely unbothered by the impending threat. "Brandon has money," Dominic had said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that sent an involuntary shiver down Harper's spine. "I have an army. There is a fundamental difference, Harper. He buys intimidation. I command loyalty. He will not breach this building." But Harper knew Brandon. She knew the obsessive, suffocating darkness that drove him. He viewed her not as a person, but as a possession he had misplaced. And Brandon never allowed his possessions to be taken by someone else. The first sign of trouble arrived on a Thursday evening. The Boston skyline was painted in bruised shades of purple and charcoal, heavy rain clouds rolling in from the Atlantic. Harper was in Dominic's kitchen, preparing a simple dinner of roasted chicken and vegetables. She found a strange comfort in the mundane task, a brief respite from the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Dominic was seated at the kitchen island, his laptop open, reviewing shipping manifests. The domesticity of the scene was entirely at odds with the loaded Sig Sauer P226 resting next to his keyboard. Suddenly, the encrypted intercom on the wall buzzed. It wasn't the standard building system. It was a secure line connected directly to the men guarding the perimeter. Dominic pressed the button. "Speak, boss?" Leo's voice crackled through the speaker, tight and professional. "We have a situation in the lobby. 3 unmarked black Suburbans just pulled up to the loading dock. Vanguard plates. 6 men, tactical gear under civilian coats. They bypassed the concierge and are demanding access to the 4th floor. They have a man claiming to be a process server with a federal warrant." Harper dropped the kitchen knife. It clattered against the marble countertop, a sharp, jarring sound that echoed in the silent apartment. Her breath hitched. "He's here." Dominic didn't flinch. His expression hardened into a mask of pure, unadulterated menace. He slowly closed his laptop. "A federal warrant for what, exactly?" "They claim they are assisting a private retrieval operation for a stolen asset," Leo replied. "A Miss Harper Collins." A wave of nausea washed over Harper. Stolen asset. That was exactly how Brandon saw her. She backed away from the counter, her hands trembling uncontrollably. "Dominic," she whispered, her voice cracking. "They'll tear this place apart. They'll kill your men. Let me go out there. If I surrender, he might just leave you alone." Dominic stood up, wincing slightly as his injured side stretched. But he ignored the pain. He crossed the kitchen in 3 long strides, stopping mere inches from her. He reached out, his large hands gripping her shoulders firmly. The warmth of his touch was grounding, pulling her back from the precipice of panic. "Look at me," Dominic commanded softly. Harper forced her eyes up to meet his. They were dark, dangerous, and completely fearless. "You are not an asset," Dominic said, his words deliberately slow and measured. "You are a guest in my home. And nobody, no lawyer, no mercenary, no ghost from your past, takes what is under my protection. Do you understand?" Tears pricked Harper's eyes, but she nodded. "He won't stop, Dominic. He's a monster." "Then it's a good thing you moved in next to a bigger monster," Dominic replied, a dark, lethal smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. He turned back to the intercom. "Leo, lock down the elevators. Engage the secondary security protocols. If they attempt to breach the stairwell, authorize lethal force. Nobody gets past the second floor." "Copy that, boss." The intercom clicked off. The heavy silence descended again, but it was thick with anticipation. Dominic walked over to a seemingly ordinary bookshelf against the far wall. He reached behind a thick, leather-bound volume of Dante's Inferno and pressed a hidden mechanism. The entire bookshelf swung open silently, revealing a hidden armory that looked like it belonged in a military compound. Rifles, tactical vests, ammunition boxes, and communication gear lined the walls. Dominic pulled a heavy Kevlar vest from a hanger and tossed it onto the sofa. "Put that on," he instructed Harper, his tone shifting from protector to commander. "Dominic, your stitches are holding fine," he interrupted, grabbing a sleek, short-barreled automatic rifle and checking the magazine. "Harper, I need you to stay in the secure room behind the armory. It's reinforced steel. Even if they make it up here, they won't be able to breach it before my reinforcements arrive." "Reinforcements?" Harper asked as she struggled to pull the heavy Kevlar vest over her head. "I made a few phone calls while you were cooking," Dominic stated casually, slipping a spare magazine into his pocket. "The Vanguard team thinks they are hitting an isolated target. They don't realize I have 60 armed associates currently surrounding this building, closing the net." Brandon walked directly into a trap. Harper stared at him, her mind struggling to process the sheer scale of the violence about to unfold. She had thought she was running away from danger. Instead, she had positioned herself at the very epicenter of a Mafia war. Suddenly, a loud, concussive thud vibrated through the floorboards. The lights in the apartment flickered and died, plunging the penthouse into absolute darkness. A second later, the red emergency lighting kicked on, casting an eerie, bloody glow over the living room. "They blew the power grid," Dominic said, his voice calm, analytical. He handed Harper a heavy maglite flashlight. "Get in the secure room. Now!" Harper didn't argue. She moved quickly, slipping past the armory shelves and into the small, windowless panic room at the back. It was stocked with water, medical supplies, and a bank of security monitors. Dominic stood in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the red emergency lights. "Lock the door behind me. Do not open it for anyone but me. If you hear someone else's voice, you stay completely silent." "Dominic," Harper called out before he could close the heavy steel door. "Be careful." He paused, looking back at her. For a fraction of a second, the cold Mafia boss melted away, revealing the man who had let her stitch his wounds on his living room floor. "I always am," he murmured. The heavy steel door slammed shut. The locking mechanism engaged with a definitive hollow clank. Harper was completely alone. She turned to the security monitors on the wall. Several cameras had been disabled, displaying only grey static, but the camera in the fourth-floor hallway was still active. Harper watched the screen, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. For 5 agonizing minutes, nothing happened. Then the stairwell door violently burst open. 4 men spilled into the hallway. They were dressed head to toe in black tactical gear, carrying suppressed submachine guns. They moved with terrifying, coordinated precision, checking corners and advancing down the runner, the exact same runner where Harper had found Dominic's blood just days earlier. The Vanguard mercenaries stopped directly in front of apartment 4A. One of the men pulled a heavy breaching charge from his vest, preparing to blow the locks off Dominic's door. Harper held her breath, gripping the edge of the metal desk. Before the mercenary could plant the explosive, the door of apartment 4B, Harper's old empty unit, flew open. Dominic stepped out into the hallway. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't waiting for them to breach. He was taking the fight directly to them. The hallway erupted into chaos. The security feed lacked audio, transforming the brutal firefight in the hallway into a macabre, silent ballet of violence. Muzzle flashes strobed wildly, illuminating the corridor in harsh, blinding bursts of white light. Harper watched in horrified fascination as Dominic moved. He didn't fight like a man nursing a severe stab wound. He moved with the lethal, fluid grace of a predator defending its territory. He fired 2 precise bursts from his rifle, dropping the 2 Vanguard mercenaries closest to him before they could even pivot to acquire him as a target. The remaining 2 men scrambled for cover behind a thick marble pillar near the elevator bank, returning fire. Plaster exploded from the walls, raining dust and debris onto the floor. Dominic ducked back into the doorway of apartment 4B, using the reinforced doorframe as a shield. Harper's hands gripped the edge of the console so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Please, please let him be okay," she chanted silently in her mind. On the screen, a new figure stepped out of the stairwell. He wasn't wearing tactical gear. He wore a perfectly tailored navy blue Brioni suit, his blonde hair flawlessly styled. He looked entirely out of place in a war zone, yet he commanded the space with a cold, arrogant authority. Harper's blood turned to ice. Brandon. He had actually come himself. His ego, his obsessive need to possess her, had driven him to personally oversee the extraction. He stood behind the remaining mercenaries, shouting something, his face twisted in a mask of rage. Dominic, realizing the true target had arrived, abandoned the safety of the doorframe. He stepped fully out into the open hallway, his rifle raised. The exchange of fire was terrifyingly brief. 1 Vanguard mercenary went down, clutching his thigh. The other managed to fire a desperate spray of bullets before Dominic's return fire caught him squarely in the chest plate, throwing him backward. Suddenly, the hallway was quiet. The dust settled, swirling in the emergency lights. Dominic stood at the end of the hall, his weapon aimed squarely at Brandon's chest. Brandon, completely disarmed and utterly out of his depth, froze. The corporate bully had finally come face to face with a genuine monster, and the reality of his situation seemed to crush him. Harper couldn't hear the words being exchanged, but the body language was clear. Brandon was trying to negotiate. He held his hands up, taking a slow step backward toward the stairwell. He was offering money, making threats, attempting to use the same manipulative tactics that had kept Harper trapped for years. Dominic simply stood there, immovable, cold, and calculating. He didn't lower his weapon. He took 1 step forward, then another. Brandon stumbled backward, his arrogance completely evaporating, replaced by raw, naked terror. He turned to run. Before he could take 2 steps, the stairwell door opened again. Leo and Matteo stepped out, their weapons drawn, completely blocking Brandon's only exit. The trap Dominic had mentioned earlier had closed. Vanguard's men on the lower floors had clearly been neutralized. Brandon was entirely surrounded. Dominic lowered his rifle, letting it hang by the sling. He walked slowly down the hallway until he was standing face to face with the man who had terrorized Harper for 3 years. Harper pressed her hand against the cold glass of the monitor, tears streaming down her face. Not tears of fear, but tears of overwhelming, shocking relief. It was over. On the screen, Dominic leaned in, speaking quietly to Brandon. Whatever he said caused Brandon's face to drain of all color. His knees buckled slightly. Dominic didn't touch him. He didn't have to. The pure psychological dominance was enough to shatter the man. Dominic gestured to Leo. Leo stepped forward, grabbing Brandon roughly by the collar of his expensive suit and hauling him toward the service elevator. Matteo followed, dragging the injured mercenaries out of sight. Within minutes, the hallway was empty, leaving only the bullet-riddled walls and the lingering dust as evidence of the siege. Harper sat in the silent panic room for what felt like hours, though it was likely only 10 minutes. The heavy steel door finally clicked, the locking mechanism disengaging. The door swung open. Dominic stood in the threshold. He looked exhausted. His white shirt was covered in plaster dust, and a fresh patch of red was slowly blooming through the fabric near his side, where his stitches had likely torn. But his dark eyes were incredibly gentle as he looked at her. "He's gone," Dominic said quietly. Harper stood up, her legs trembling so violently she nearly collapsed. "Gone? Like dead?" "No," Dominic replied, stepping into the room. "Death is too quick for a man like that. I had my associates place him on a private cargo plane, bound for a facility I own in South America. He will spend the next several decades working in a lithium mine. He has no money, no identity, and absolutely no way to ever contact you again. The world thinks Brandon abruptly relocated to Dubai for a permanent corporate position. He no longer exists." Harper stared at him, trying to comprehend the magnitude of what he had just done. He had dismantled her nightmare with a single, ruthless stroke. He had given her back her life. She closed the distance between them, wrapping her arms carefully around his neck, avoiding his injured side. She buried her face in his chest, breathing in the scent of gunpowder, cedar, and survival. Dominic hesitated for a fraction of a second before his strong arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her flush against him. He rested his chin on the top of her head, his heavy sigh vibrating through her. "You're safe, Harper," he murmured into her hair. "Nobody will ever touch you again." "I know," she whispered, squeezing her eyes shut. She had moved into apartment 4B to hide from the devil. She had expected a life of paranoia, isolation, and constant fear. Instead, she had found an unlikely protector in the shadows of apartment 4A. Dominic Russo was a criminal, a mafia boss, a man steeped in violence. But as she stood in his arms, surrounded by the remnants of a war fought entirely for her, Harper realized she didn't care. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was exactly where she belonged. If you were captivated by Harper's thrilling escape and Dominic's ruthless protection, you will not want to miss our next gripping story. Hit that like button, share this video with your fellow romance and drama lovers, and subscribe to our channel for more intense, heart-pounding mafia romances. Do not forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss a twist, a betrayal, or a steamy encounter. Your support keeps these stories alive. Please comment your favorite character today.